Hello to our subscribers, and welcome to another Attractive Explainer. Today, we're going to descend into the dark, uncharted depths of human psychology to decode one of philosophy's most misunderstood ideas. But before we begin, let me just ask you something. Have you ever wondered if your most selfless acts, your moments of pure charity, are actually driven by a hidden, deeply selfish desire for power? Well, we're taking a long journey into the human soul today. We're looking way past the polished surface of our everyday morality. And trust me, we are not going to leave a single thing out.
So Friedrich Nietzsche, this is a guy who literally spent his entire life peering into the shadows. He absolutely didn't see human nature as inherently noble or pure. Instead, he looked at the human mind like it was this vast, dark landscape, just full of hidden, honestly kind of ugly machinery. His ultimate goal wasn't just to sit around and write philosophy. He wanted to act like a diagnostic surgeon. He wanted to rip off the bandages of polite society and expose the raw, pulsing mechanics underneath it all. He wanted us to face what we are actually made of, no matter how terrifying that reality might be.
Now, you've probably heard this quote before. It's from his notoriously difficult book, Beyond Good and Evil, and it gets thrown around vaguely on the internet all the time, almost like a spooky bumper sticker. But here's the thing. It actually holds a precise, dangerous, and incredibly profound psychological meaning. Think about what it actually feels like to gaze into an abyss in real life. It's that sudden, totally terrifying moment when you confront a deeply intrusive thought, or you suddenly realize you possess a dark impulse that you had no idea was even there. Nietzsche wasn't just trying to sound witty here. He was diagnosing a fundamental truth about grappling with the absolute ugliest parts of our own human nature.
To truly grasp this quote, we need a roadmap. Here are the 6 steps we're going to take to unlearn our past and descend into the abyss of the human soul. First, the psychologist of the depths. Second, Odysseus and the Greek mind. Third, Plato's world of forms. Fourth, the value of untruth. Fifth, the will to power. And finally, gazing into the abyss. All right, let's jump right in.
Section 1. The psychologist of the depths.
Nietzsche actually boasted that he possessed these unique psychological antennae. And what he meant was that they allowed him to sense the entrails, like the hidden, often gory mechanical workings, right beneath our civilized exterior. He completely rejected the simple dualities that pretty much every other psychologist just blindly accepted. Take the dividing line between altruism and egoism, for example. We usually think of these as exact, polar opposites, right? But Nietzsche pushed right past this. He would argue that a mother fiercely caring for her child, which society calls pure altruism, is actually an extension of her own ego and power. She's protecting her own creation, basically asserting her dominance and survival through another person. He really wanted us to stop looking at human behavior through this simplistic binary lens and start looking at the deeper and frankly often uncomfortable underlying drives.
Section 2. Odysseus and the Greek mind.
So, let's rewind the clock a bit. Unlike us, the ancient Greeks actually admired the trickster Odysseus way more than the purely honest Achilles. Think about the Trojan horse. That was a massive, highly lethal deception. Today, and certainly to the later Romans, winning through a trap like that is seen as, somewhat cowardly compared to winning through sheer courage and brawn like Achilles would. But for the pre-Platonic Greeks, Odysseus's cunning was a total virtue. Why? Because they lived in a highly chaotic, wildly unpredictable world where cunning was just an absolute necessity for survival. For them, that strict dividing line between truth and lies, it literally simply did not exist. They lived in a world where appearance was reality, and outsmarting your enemy by literally any means necessary was the absolute highest mark of a successful, thriving human being.
Section 3. Plato's world of forms.
Now, as we trace the timeline of human thought, we actually see a massive de-evolution. We devolve from the blunt, harsh reality of the early Greeks, like the historian Thucydides, who just openly accepted human selfishness and brutality as natural facts of life, to Plato's highly idealistic philosophy. Plato comes along and introduces the world of forms. He argued that our messy, material world is just a fake, pale shadow of a perfect heavenly reality. Well, Nietzsche viewed this as sheer psychological cowardice. To him, the world of forms was basically a psychological escape hatch for people who were just too afraid to face the brutal, meaningless reality of the physical world. And eventually, this morphed into Christian theology, which Nietzsche notoriously called Platonism for the masses, where truth became this divine, separate entity completely and entirely divorced from our actual earthly existence. Nietzsche absolutely vehemently attacked this way of thinking. He argued that philosophers suffered from a disease he literally called Egyptianism. It's kind of like, imagine taking a photograph of a rapidly running river and then pretending the water never, ever moves. That is exactly what philosophers did. They mummified living, breathing concepts into these rigid, dead ideals of being. They tried to just freeze reality, completely ignoring the chaotic, flowing river of becoming that actually defines the world we live in. By arbitrarily separating truth from falsehood and strictly categorizing people into these rigid, unmoving boxes of good or evil, they effectively completely blinded themselves to how fluid and complex human psychology actually works.
Section 4. The Value of Untruth.
This boldly challenges a massive foundational prejudice. I mean, why do we instinctively prefer truth to untruth? We just take it completely on faith that truth is always better, right? But Nietzsche dares to ask the forbidden question, what if delusion, selfishness, and untruth are actually more fundamental to the preservation of life? Just pause and really reflect on that for a second. Think about blind optimism in the face of certain doom, or the sheer undeniable power of the placebo effect. Sometimes self-deception is the exact thing that keeps a person moving forward, when the cold, objective truth would completely crush them. So what if the quote-unquote good things we respect are essentially tied up, knotted together, and utterly identical to the evil things we despise?
Section 5. The Will to Power. This brings us to the core of it. Beneath our civilized exterior lies a base, Machiavellian thirst for power that dictates even our most supposedly altruistic actions. Let's really lean into this because it's a massive, highly controversial insight. When we engage in charity, Nietzsche argues we often subconsciously really enjoy the feeling of making someone else dependent on us. It makes us feel superior, you know? It literally increases our power. Even the solitary philosopher who's out there seeking absolute truth is really just doing it to elevate himself above the masses. And yes, baked right into the human cake is an innate, undeniable desire to inflict cruelty. We are not fundamentally good creatures who just accidentally happen to do bad things sometimes. No, these dark urges are the core, fundamental components of our psychological machinery.
Section 6. Gazing into the abyss.
So Nietzsche warns that trying to simply cut out our dark parts makes us deeply, deeply sick. The historical improvers of mankind, like strict dogmatic religions, they tried to tame humans the exact same way you'd tame a wild wolf into a sick, weak little pug. They used fear, hunger, and depression to basically castrate its natural instincts. They're the ones who say, if your eye offends you, pluck it out. But true strength, the actual path to what Nietzsche called the Superman, is absolutely not about removing temptation. It is staring the abyss right in the face, intimately feeling those dark urges, and possessing the immense power, nobility, and sheer discipline to choose self-control. It is entirely about integration, not repression.
Ultimately, to fight monsters without becoming one means integrating our inner darkness to become superhuman, rather than just giving up and capitulating to the monster. If you gaze into the abyss and you discover your own capacity for cruelty, greed, and selfishness, you absolutely cannot fight it with monstrous methods. You can't just violently rip it out of yourself. You must acknowledge it, master it, and actually harness its subterranean energy for your own conscious purposes. Practically speaking, what does this mean? It means taking your natural aggression and using it to fuel your ambition. It means taking your capacity for cruelty and using it to establish strict, unyielding boundaries in your life. You take those traits society calls evil and you transfigure them into productive, life-affirming power.
So, we leave you with this final provocative thought to ponder about the uncharted depths of your own soul. What monsters lie hidden in your own abyss? And do you have the courage to master them without being consumed? The abyss is real. It is inside you, and it absolutely will gaze back. But knowing what is truly down there, well, that's the very first step to true mastery. Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer, and we will catch you next time.